G'day, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rennie, and today we're getting mindful about mental health and, in particular, anxiety and OCD, two of my favorite subjects to talk about. And a trigger warning, because we're talking about mental health, some people may get triggered by this conversation. So if you feel that that may happen to you, feel free to skip this episode. But if you do stick around and you do get triggered, please reach out to your support networks afterwards. And joining me today, I've got Kimberley Quinlan from California. How are you going, Kimberley?
I'm good. I'm actually an Australian, but I am living in California. I always feel like I have to preface that. Yes.
Yes.
Living in Los Angeles.
It's good that you've still got your Aussie accent. We'll just talk
I know.
about this offline.
Thank goodness. Yes. I love my Aussie accent. Although it does get a little American here and there. You will hear it come out here and there.
I noticed that on the Instagram, and that's where we first touched base is through Instagram, and you've got the Your Anxiety Toolkit handle. And I did notice that a bit on Instagram. I'm not sure if it's just the particular platform, but you sound very Aussie on Zoom. So
Good.
Now, Kimberley, you're an anxiety and OCD specialist and founder of CBT School. So I'm really excited to explore these things today. But I've thought it'd be good to hear a bit about you and some of those key life moments, like where you grew up and how you made your way over to the US and some of the things that make you who you are.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Kimberley Quinlan, as you said. I grew up in the north coast of New South Wales and had a wonderful childhood in the country and lots of family and so forth. For reasons still doesn't make sense to me, I had this long wish to travel to the United States. And by accident, I met my husband, who is American, and basically didn't leave after that trip. So my whole plan kind of got derailed. But what was interesting was, as I was going through my bachelor degree, which was in Lismore of New South Wales, I started to develop an eating disorder and started to really struggle with that. So then by the time I landed in America and I was very isolated, I didn't have any family here, I kind of sort of went down the mental health drain at that point and was really, really struggling. And so through getting therapy myself and knowing multiple people who had anxiety, and mine was so anxiety based and so compulsive, lots of compulsive exercise and lots of body image issues. After getting quite a lot of help and starting to be fully in recovery for that, I made the decision that I wanted to become a therapist. Mm-hmm. And from there, I went on to basically specialize in anxiety disorders.
Wow. And like before you experienced your eating disorder, like was mental health an issue for you prior to that, like growing up?
No, actually, I was a really happy kid. I didn't have, I had anxiety, but I don't remember. I had a very easy childhood in terms of I had friends and I didn't get bullied and I didn't really care about academics. So that wasn't a big stressor. And I grew up in a small town where I didn't have the pressure, I think, that some kids who live in the city had. My family were really low key, chill family. And so what I know now, and as particularly as a therapist, is leaving home particularly was a big stressor for me. I felt like I was so out of control. I was so anxious about the world being such a huge place, particularly growing up in a town of like 600 people. And so I think I went to like over control as my coping mechanism. And because in my family system and in my my extended family, lots of comments were made about weight and jokes were made about weight. I always tell my patients, I remember at my wedding, and a person in an extended family said out loud in front of like pretty much the whole crowd a joke about how wives always gain a bunch of weight once they get married. And these were just sort of stories I had read. So I think in that way I tried to control my environment by controlling my weight. And like I said, things spiraled pretty quickly out of control from there.
Yeah. Why do you think like people joke about weight and so if I remember like growing up and I moved away after university as well. And then when I came back I lived in Canberra for a few years and every now and then I'd go back to Adelaide and see mum and dad. And dad would always say, "Oh, you've put on weight." And that'd be the first thing he says. Like, so why do you think people talk about weight in that way and joke about it?
Well, I think that we have a societal fat phobia, not like a traditional anxiety disorder phobia, but just we have these beliefs about weight that it makes us lazy or people who have, I think that we've taken on these faulty beliefs that, I think they're spread throughout culture in America here as well, in that we have these ideas of what people in larger bodies are like, whether they're successful or not, they're lovable or not, and so forth. And I think if that doesn't get challenged, it's easy for us to sort of present that onto our children, and then it goes
Mm.
down generation, or put it out against people in our society as well. So I think that's one piece. And I also think, interestingly, most of the time the people who commented had their own weight issue. And so I think it can also be like they're projecting onto other people their own issues with their own weight often. And that was, I think, very much the case for me.
Yeah. And so like why were weight discussions something that you like internalized and felt a lot of pressure about? Like, can you talk us a bit through that?
Well, I come from a family that is some very successful family, like I said, just a good all-round family. And so I think my anxiety, and this is why I personally never felt that connected to the eating disorder community. I always felt like it was more of an anxiety disorder.
Mm.
My anorexia, I felt very much focused on how can I manage this physical feeling of anxiety. So for me, it was, I'm feeling this anxiety. So what can I was hyper vigilant on how I could prevent bad things, quote unquote, from happening. And so that's what I went into: excessive exercise, very compulsive exercise, excessive calorie counting, massive amounts of rumination around it. So that was my way of coping with the anxiety that I felt. And because the world felt so out of control, I was like, this is just one area that I can control.
Mm.
And it played out in many other areas too. I'm not going to lie, like perfectionism and workaholism and being excessive in many ways. But this was the one thing that got really stuck.
Yeah. And did you find yourself like I remember every time I try to diet, for example, I'm looking at calorie intake and stuff like that. So did you find yourself in supermarkets reading labels on packaging about what should be in your body and what shouldn't be in your body? Like how much did you just absorb yourself into this world?
Well, I chose a bachelor degree in exercise science and nutrition, and then was on my way into taking a dietitian master's degree. Thank God I actually got rejected from that program,
Yeah.
because I still don't know if I'd be recovered if I was a dietitian to this day. I don't know if I could have survived that. Um, oh, believe me, listen, hours, hundreds of hours put towards mentally calculating. I had my fitness pal, every single cucumber piece was
Wow.
calculated. When I knew, I actually have a podcast episode that I share, but the breakthrough moment for me was I was actually planning a trip back to Australia, and they gave me, like, you get to pick vegetarian meal or regular meals on an airplane. And that just sent me off the edge, right? Like the fact that I had no control over what I ate for 12 hours set me spinning. And that's when I actually realized, like, I have a massive problem, like a 12-hour period of not controlling my food, and I'm losing it. Like, I need help. That was my breaking moment.
Yeah. So would you go 12 hours without eating or would you force yourself to eat or would you sneak food on board? Like what did that flight look like for you?
No, I actually, you know, fortunately and unfortunately, I have a body that gets massively shaky if I don't eat. So even though I met criteria to have anorexia, I wasn't one of those people who could like do intermittent fasting or anything. Like my whole body would go shaky. So there's no way I could have gone that long without eating, which is a blessing, right?
Yeah.
I'm lucky because going that long without eating is very, problematic and is not healthy. But that's why I was spinning, because I was like, I have no choices. You can't take food onto the plane unless it's what you buy at the airport, and airports didn't have the food I wanted. And I wasn't going to sneak anything because I was too anxious about getting caught, like anxiety from every angle. And so so I basically was like, well, I have a problem. Like if I can't take an 8-hour flight or a 10-hour flight, I've got big problems.
Yeah. And did anybody ever tell you before that moment that you might have a problem?
No, I was worshipped for my problem.
Oh,
I was
wow.
congratulated for my problem, that I have, Kimberly, like you have so much discipline. I wish I was like you. I wish I could only eat, I used to have this regimen where I'd have half a piece of wheat pita with half an apple, and that was my snack. And or my lunch even, and they'd be like, I wish I had your discipline, or I wish I had your body. And I was thinking like, okay, like this is working, until I was like, you have no idea how much it takes to keep
Yeah.
this. You have no idea how much pain I am. I'm so stuck. I am anxious all the time, and you have no idea how much I have to exercise to maintain this. So it was pretty hellish, but I only got positive feedback.
Yeah, wow. Like it's so interesting. Like when that moment when people realize something's not right here, I've got to get help. And often I find it's an internal like light bulb moment where you might have had people talking to you and saying, Simon, you've got an issue, or Kimberly, you've got an issue, or maybe you don't have an issue. You're the pin-up poster child that we all look up to, but it's internal that we go, can't keep doing this anymore. I need to change, because I love this Tony Robbins quote, like the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain that I'm going to go through with the change.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't believe that people, yeah, were looking up to you as this disciplined person. Take us through, like, if things didn't go that well on a day and maybe you ate something that you know you shouldn't have, or that might have made you anxious, or you didn't do that workout or whatever, like what was going through your mind and your body during those times?
Probably a lot of self-criticism, but if I'm going to be completely honest, I would never allow that to happen.
Mm,
Unfortunately, it was a non-negotiable in my disorder. Um, except for like, I mean, here's an example. Even when I would fly, using flights to Australia, even when I would fly, my husband, we were once driving to the airport, and I walked alongside the car because I couldn't take the anxiety of not having gotten my steps in for the day. Um,
wow,
yeah,
wow.
like I was very unwell, and
Yeah.
I hid it really well, but I just found a way. If I had to fly, I would walk up and down the terminal until I got my steps, or I would be doing box steps up on a chair. So I couldn't have tolerated it. So to answer your question, what would I have had to tolerate? Once I started treatment, I had to tolerate shame, guilt, anger, anxiety, um, sadness, like all the emotions, because I had attached so many different beliefs to this idea of my body being very small. So
Yeah.
letting go of all that was really, really hard, but so worth it. So worth it.
Yeah. So take us through like your steps towards recovery, and like, was it a doctor that you first saw and spoke up about it? Like, what was that process, and how did it make you feel to kind of just finally get this out and start talking about it?
Yeah. So I first went to one therapist who was very helpful, but I only saw them for a couple of sessions, 4 sessions, I think it was. And she was really just helpful in acknowledging, like, what's the worst that could happen? That was a big part. Like, what's the
Mhm.
worst? I could gain a ton of weight. Then what? Okay, people would judge me. Okay, then what? I'd feel really feel a lot of shame and anxiety. And she'd go, okay, so then what? And then I kind of was able to go, oh, okay, like I can at least see the direction I was going, but then I quit therapy because I was like, that's scary.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, but
I did
it's
it.
a really good like tool. Like, then what? Then what? Then what? Because you
Yeah.
keep you almost like you talk yourself out of excuses
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. But I basically was like, oh, I see where you're going, friend, and
Yeah.
I'm not going with you. Then I actually got really into, I did a lot of my own work. I got really into Buddhist philosophy. I looked a lot at like the theory of suffering and non-attachment. And that helped me sort of break the deeper,
Hmm.
brittle bones of the disorder. And then I think once I was like, okay, I think I got this. I think I'm ready. Went and saw a therapist who is like changed my life, challenged me in some massive ways, challenged me to eat a burrito, which was like a 10 out of 10 for me. I'll never forget, like, my homework is to go home and eat a burrito, or to go and have a margarita. I mean, my God, to think about eat like, they'd always say, like, you don't drink your calories. To drink your calories is a huge exposure for me.
Hmm.
But I did it very, very many times for practice. So that was sort of the process. And then again, I took another break and was like, I've got to like gather myself. And then and then I think I went back and like finished off treatment with her later, once I'd had stages of willingness, I think we could say.
Yeah. And like thinking back to your very first therapy session, was it hard to talk about it? And did it get easier each therapy session?
Uh, she was an eating disorder specialist, so I knew she knew what I was coming for. I
Yeah.
had not admitted to anybody I had this problem, even my husband at the time. So that was hard. Um, I think it was actually really, I needed her validation, actually. So once I told her, and she's like, you have an eating disorder, like, you meet criteria. Even though that was sad, I was actually so relieved, because I was like, okay, this is a legit thing.
Mm.
It almost gave me permission to get help. So I think I felt a lot of relief. I went home and I told my partner. Um, and I think having her saying it made me feel valid in that I had a real problem. Because before that, I don't think I felt like it was a real problem.
Yeah. What was it like telling your partner that this was going on or had been going on for a long time? What was that
Well, the
discussion
funny
like?
thing Well, the funny thing is, and this has happened multiple times in my life, is when I finally get the courage to tell my partner or my friend or my family, they're like, yeah, we know. Like, we just didn't want to say anything. Or like,
Wow. All this
right, like,
reinforcement over the years, and then all of a sudden, oh, like, yeah, we knew what was going on, but we just didn't want to tell you. Yeah.
well, and I think it's too a part of the way I carried myself. Like, I'm a tough girl, and I'm on top of things, and I've got it together, and a little maybe even defensive about things. So I think for them, they're like, something's probably going on, and she'll get there when she gets there, kind of thing. So he was like, yeah, I know you have a problem, like, and he was supportive. So I'm lucky. I'm so lucky, and I recognize my privilege in being able to access care and have supportive family and friends and partner, and access correct care, which is a massive value of mine,
Yeah.
because it could have gone much worse.
So, how many years was it before you started experiencing symptoms to when you were getting treatment and starting to open it up? Was it a long time?
Probably 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. It got really much worse when I moved to America, not because of American culture, but because of how isolated I was. I had nothing to do. I wasn't allowed to get a job because I was going through immigration. And so I exercised. And so that's how I managed my anxiety. I mean, the thing is, exercise is a really great way to manage anxiety, but not when you're doing it for hours and hours a day, right? That's excessive. So for me, it was about a 3 year slow grow progression. And then it got really amped up when I got
Yeah.
married and moved to America.
Wow. And you mentioned a few times that like you started therapy, and it's something that a lot of people experience. I've experienced it myself. It's been 10 years since I first went and saw a psychologist, and interestingly, also what you said in terms of that validation of what you were going through. So when I was diagnosed with OCD, particularly, and I'd been living with it apparently for since I was 8, and it was 28 when I finally got help for
Mhm.
it, and
Mhm.
anxiety and depression. I felt this sense of a little bit of sadness, but so much relief that okay, there's something actually going on here. I'm not just weird. There is something that going on, And the person who's telling me this has talked about it with hundreds of people before. And every therapist since has talked about it with other people before. So I'm not alone in the world. I feel like I'm part of a community. And it just felt so good. But so many people I see in the mental health space say I'm not defined by my diagnosis. But in a way, I feel personally, I'm not sure what you think, is it helps define me and it helps me just understand who I am. And then that helps me get better. And then I can use that as fuel for the fire in my belly to talk about mental health, which is now my passion piece as well. Would you think the same, like that a diagnosis, while it doesn't define us, it does certainly help us understand who we are
Yeah.
and
I
so
think
forth?
it's both. I think our diagnosis doesn't define us, but it can make a whole lot of sense, and
Mm,
it can validate years of confusion and feeling like you're so alone. I think that's, I hear I'm in the social media space, and sometimes I hear some very strong opinions about diagnoses. And I'm like, no, diagnoses are super important. They help
mm,
people to feel like they have a secret club that, to get in that secret club, even though it's scary, it's so relieving. But then having the diagnosis can also then help you to know the specific treatment. Because
mm.
if there wasn't a name for what you had, you're still like looking around for what's the actual treatment I need. So I
Yeah.
fully agree with you.
Yeah, I had this discussion with Dr. Lena Haji. She's a clinical psychologist over in the US, and she was on the show as well. And she was talking about misdiagnosis as well, and then the importance of misdiagnosis. And if you start along one treatment line, the medications might be not the right medications. Um, Also, it's also the expertise of the person diagnosing you. So if they're not familiar with certain conditions, like OCD, I found it really hard to find people that are specialized in OCD and have in Australia and have much awareness of OCD. It's everything's around depression and anxiety,
Yeah.
schizophrenia, bipolar, all those types, but not so much OCD. So I've had to hunt around for my therapist. But certainly misdiagnosis is something that can send us down a few rabbit warrens, and we've got to try and dig our way out. But it's important to find, I guess, specialists that know what they're doing
Yeah.
in particular type of situations. So I'd love to go back to your study though, and so you wanted to become a therapist. Talk us a bit about your therapy studies and the drivers there, and did you have a goal of becoming like a CBT school founder, or when did this pop into your head? Tell us a bit about this journey.
Yeah, so it's actually funny because I had such great treatment. I knew what kind of and I knew what kind of therapy worked for me. And when I went into my master's degree, they were all pushing way different kinds of therapy, much more spiritual kind of therapy. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Much more humanistic therapy. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, these are all great modalities. But because I wanted to specialize in anxiety, some of it didn't jive with me at all. I was like, no, I so know what, when someone has anxiety, I just felt like I know what I needed. So it was a little bit difficult, I won't lie, to sort of be hearing about these and really enjoying learning about them, but also going, no, I don't, that's not my gel.
Mm.
And so as I was going through, the cool thing is I got to learn about all of those, but that actually like really consolidated, like I know exactly what I want to do. And I only had one CBT class in the whole master's degree. But that course just was so helpful to me. And again, it really pushed me to be like, this is exactly what I wanted to do. So that when you go through your course and then you have to do 3,000 hours of internship to get your license, that was all I was looking for. So that's kind of why I wanted CBT so much, just because I had seen how it had helped me, and I had also seen how it had helped other people at that point as well.
Yeah. Whenever I hear a CBT, I always think back to thought journals and homework, and I really hated that stuff, and I think that's why I stopped therapy the first time, because I'm like, oh, this is just talking about it's hard, but then to go home and do homework, with
Yeah.
thought journals and diaries and so forth. But for anyone who's not familiar with CBT, can you tell us a bit about what it is and how it can help anxiety conditions?
Sure, yeah. So CBT is an acronym for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. So basically what we do is we look at your thoughts, which is the thought records that you're talking about. We really just examine thoughts and we decide whether the thoughts you're thinking are helpful or not. And what you'll probably find is lots of your thoughts aren't super helpful, right? And
Yeah.
so we either will correct those thoughts or we may actually instead just change our reaction to those thoughts, right? And that does take a lot of work. Now, as I always say, will say to clients, like, you don't have to do your homework, but 1 hour a week of this, and then if you go back to do 23 hours of this day doing your old thinking, not much is going to change, which is why we make you guys do so much homework. And I know it sucks, but it's similar to anything. If you're learning Spanish, you're going to have to practice it quite a bit for it to gel. The behavioral component of cognitive behavioral therapy is where we look at your behaviors and look at if they're effective, and are your behaviors actually reinforcing some cognitions that aren't helpful. So you'd think about, if you, let's say you're afraid of dogs, for example, your thought might be, all dogs will bite me. I'll use me as an example. I got bit by a dog when I was very young. And then I went into a full black and white belief that all dogs are dangerous. So we had to first acknowledge, not all dogs are dangerous, right? Then what we also noticed is when I saw a dog, I would freeze up and clench and in some cases run. And that also wasn't very helpful because it reinforced my fear and it actually made the dog really jittery and made me freak out even more. So if we were to use that, we would correct some thoughts and we would change behaviors. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy in a nutshell, but we do a pretty a wide functional analysis of all your thoughts and all your behaviors, and we slowly work at one at a time. It's pretty gradual, right? And the cool thing is you could take baby steps. It's not like we're going to throw you in the deep end right away.
Yeah.
But the thing to know about CBT is CBT is probably one of the most researched of all therapies. It's by far, I would say, the one that shines a lot for anxiety disorders, depression, even bipolar, schizophrenia. These are really ADHD, these are really important treatment modalities. But depending on the diagnosis, the ratio between cognitive and behavioral changes. And that's why diagnosis is so important. So CBT is really helpful for eating disorders and OCD. But in OCD, we do a ton more behavioral work than we do eating disorders, for example.
Yeah. As you're describing that, like the unhelpful thoughts, and I thought, I just immediately went straight to my OCD because someone living with OCD is in those thoughts constantly, like almost 24/7, it feels like. And then the behaviors add on top of that. So, and I think that's what really freaked me out the first time, because it was just like, man, I'm thinking about this so much and I got to write it down. And it just became overwhelming. So I stepped away from therapy, and then I've tried different therapists, same outcome. But as I got older and more committed to therapy, as you said, to the practice, and I was committed to the practice of it, then, okay, this makes sense now. Because when I was 28, I probably wasn't even, I'd say mature, but mature enough in my mental health journey to be able to dedicate that time for the homework and the practice. But as you get older, and, now that I'm in my late 30s, I've now go, okay, this is really important and I need to do that and then since I've started doing that, it certainly has helped to alleviate some of that distress and slow down everything that's going on in my brain. So was there anything specifically in CBT that helped you that sticks out in your mind of this was a really cool technique or problem solving skill that you learned?
Yeah, so many, right? So I think the biggest concept, this is like CBT 101, is you can't choose your thoughts and you can't choose your feelings, but you can choose your behaviors, right? And then they go on to say, when you choose your behaviors, you can then start to see differences and changes in your thoughts and feelings. And that's how it works. It's kind of feels backwards, but that's how it works, right? And so for me, it was so much about behavioral change. It was so much around, yeah, I know you want to get on the treadmill and run that food off, or I know you want to, avoid that burrito, but we're going to do the scary hard thing, which sounds so scary. But what you learn is that by facing the scary thing, the discomfort will rise, but it will gradually fall on its own. And that broke my brain for a bit. Like it really did. Like it just didn't make any sense, but yet it made total sense at the same time. And it took me so long to wrap my head around it. And to be honest, the only reason it made sense in the end is after practicing it, I was like, like I'm spending all my time running away from fear when I could be just having the fear and realizing it's tolerable and I can live with it and I can actually learn skills on how to manage it. That was game changer for me.
And you were literally running away from fear by the sound of it.
Literally, figuratively, all of the metaphors running away from fear. Like yeah, exactly. I really, really was. And it was horrible. And it did really, this is the point, right? It did relieve my short-term anxiety, but it created a long-term problem.
Yeah.
And so I had to switch to like, you're going to have to tolerate the discomfort in the short term so that you can get long-term benefits from that. And that's why CBT works so well.
Yeah. I was going through therapy at the start of this year, and my psychologist actually introduced me to a really cool analogy of a rainbow, and kind of like we called it the anxiety rainbow, and your anxiety gets triggered and then it goes up and it peaks at a point. But often with someone like, in my situation, someone with OCD and anxiety as well, generalized anxiety, to alleviate that rise in anxiety, we do something to so we avoid the peak and we bring the peak down quicker and come back to baseline. So that's almost like the compulsive act in OCD, is that, okay, I've got to alleviate this anxiety from the obsessive thought. Let's do a compulsion. Okay, I'm back to baseline again. But it's, the trick is, as you're saying, sitting with that anxiety, getting over that peak and coming down naturally, and not doing those behaviors. And I joke about thought journaling and thought diaries, but I actually find writing down stuff that's happening, the thoughts in our head, actually helps disempower them and actually see them for what they are. So, for example, in a lot of anxiety disorders, the anxious thoughts, they can sound really weird and strange. Like, my entry into OCD was a student in school told me that if I didn't talk for more than a minute, I would lose my voice forever. So that became the obsessive thought. I didn't want to lose my voice. So the compulsion was to hum. And so I would hum to myself all day, every day. And surprise, I keep reflecting on this. I've never thought that what did I do when I was sleeping? You know,
Yeah.
I obviously wasn't humming, or maybe I was snoring. I don't know. But like when you say it out loud and you write it down, you're like, that's just really weird and silly. And it's not true, because there's lots of evidence to say that you can, like, monks go for years without talking and they never lose their voice. And often our anxiety, we really believe it, even though it can be so silly.
Yeah.
And when we say it out loud, people go, I think we don't talk about it a lot because we think other people might think that we're weird and silly. But yeah, a lot of it's just getting it out in the first place.
Yeah. And that's the point, right? Is we can have fears, and when we put them on paper, we can go like, that is silly, right? But it feels so real.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets us. A lot of patients, like almost 99.9% of my patients, are the most smart, intelligent people. And they'll say, I know this makes absolutely no sense, but it feels so real to me. And that's because OCD and generalized anxiety and most of the anxiety disorders are actually disorders around uncertainty, right? Is the uncertainty is what really gets under your skin. It's like, I can see it, I know it doesn't make sense, but it still feels so uncertain. And the urgency to get rid of that uncertainty is so strong that people will do compulsions, right? Whether that's, physical compulsions, avoidant compulsions, reassurance seeking compulsions, mental compulsions. Like, you could do any of those. And that's so true of people who have, OCD, anxiety, generalized anxiety, phobias, and so forth.
Yeah. Now, you're into anxiety conditions, but you do talk about OCD as well. So I'd love to know why you're passionate about OCD and it's something I love talking about. So that's why we're talking about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like what got you also interested in obsessive compulsive disorder?
Yeah, it was just luck, to be honest. So when I finished my master's degree, I was so like CBT, let's do it, and out fresh, ready to go. And then I found it was really hard to get an internship at a place that's CBT only. And so I ended up I wanted to specialize in panic disorder, actually. That was what I was really interested. I didn't want to focus on eating disorders. I think I was so burnt out on eating
Yeah.
disorders. So I really wanted to do panic disorder, and I couldn't get an internship anywhere. And I ended up getting an internship at an OCD center. And I was like, I don't care. It's fine. They treat panic. That'll do. But then as soon as I got trained in OCD, I loved it. It was such great work and such great people. And the work is like really dynamic, and you're moving, and you're doing exposures in the room, and you're facing each other's fears. And it was just so wonderful that it just stuck. So I just got lucky, to be honest. I don't have OCD myself. While I don't have OCD, the reason I resonate with it so much is my eating disorder looked exactly like OCD looked. I had an obsession. I didn't want to tolerate the discomfort, so I did all these compulsions to make it go away, which gave me short-term relief. But then the obsession came back, and I had to just go ahead and do it all over again. So when I was learning about it, I'm like, I get this. Like, I get you guys. This is how it was for me as well.
Yeah, and OCD is such a misunderstood condition, and whenever we hear about it, it's joked about, and it's like, oh, you always hear it in the workplace. I've had 15 years in the public service, so I hear my OCD is so off the charts because my pens aren't in the pen holder, or my OCD is off the charts because this presentation doesn't have a full stop at the end of this sentence. And I've never spoken about it until I burnt out in 2020, and I opened up about burnout in particular, but also my journey with depression and OCD and anxiety. And it is a very silent condition because we feel that weirdness, because I'm humming when I was a kid, or as I get older, it's about making sure I touch things certain ways to make sure they're just right. And in terms of like the door being locked and the windows closed and the ovens off and all that type of stuff. But to hear people talk about OCD in this way, I'm just like, oh, if only you knew what it was like to do this all day, every day. And then when we had COVID, I heard one guy say, oh, everyone with OCD must really love COVID because we get to wash our hands a lot. And I'm just like, oh, really? So like,
Right.
and you're in the social media space as well. Like, what do you think when you see there's a lot of pushback by the OCD community at the moment, which is really cool, actually, about OCD not being a personality trait or a personality quirk. It's actually a debilitating condition. Like, what would you add to that discussion?
Well, I get it too. I've actually stopped telling people, like when you sit on an airplane and they say, well, what do you do for a living? I just say I'm a therapist, because I used to say I'm an OCD therapist, and they go, oh yeah, you should treat me. Like, and I would either, depending on my mood, I would either say nothing at all because, I don't have the capacity, or I might educate them and say, actually, having OCD is an incredibly painful, serious disorder. In fact, it's in the top 10 most debilitating disorders. And that's not just mental disorders, that's medical disorders. It's up there with cancer and diabetes. And that usually quickly, like, turns them down quickly, or I just refer them to resources. I say, if you think you have OCD, it's very painful and no one would ever want it, so you should get services. And then usually they back out and they go, oh no, it's not a big deal. So they're my 3 ways of responding.
Because I often hear like, oh, you love everything it's all neat and tidy. I'm like, if you come to my house, my kids have turned this place upside down, and I do not care about where things are on the floor. So.
Right. There has to be a lot of education, because OCD is not just hand washing, and it's not, it's not contamination OCD. That is one subtype of dozens of subtypes. So I probably see 10% contamination cases. That doesn't make up the full of my clientele at all.
Yeah, yeah. Now, when we talk about OCD, and I've recently experienced exposure and response prevention, so ERP, and everyone talks about it being the gold standard for treating OCD. So, like, what's the difference between ERP and CBT in relation to, say, OCD? That's a lot of acronyms just in that
Yeah.
conversation.
Oh no, I know, but you're flowing, you're doing great. So think of it this way. CBT is like an umbrella for multiple kinds of CBT, right? So all CBT involves a cognitive and behavioral component. And as I said, for OCD specifically, we do tons more behavioral work than we do cognitive work. And so ERP, exposure and response prevention, is a form of CBT where we practice exposing you to your thoughts, feelings, and sensations, right? And then we practice not doing those compulsions. That's the response prevention part. And so ERP is just, it's under the umbrella of CBT. Yeah. So I am clinically a CBT therapist, but I specialize in exposure and response prevention. Just like if you had hair pulling and skin picking and you were a hair pulling and skin picking specialty, you would specialize in CBT. But your real specialty would be what's called habit reversal training, which is a different kind of CBT, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have you done much work in acceptance and commitment therapy? Because I find I love the mindfulness approach, and that's why that's the mindfulness in Mindful Men is it's grounding ourselves and being present in the moment, trying to slow thoughts and see thoughts for what they are, but also the values-based work. And then I'd take that a step further in the work that I do with guys, particularly, is like how we mindful in all the different areas of our life, like family, work, and all that type of stuff. So have you done much work in another acronym, ACT, in terms of anxiety or OCD or anything else that you work with?
Yeah, I love ACT. We consider ACT like a supplement to CBT and ERP, right? So sometimes when, let's say for you and me, and we've talked about this, is like facing your fear sucks. It's not fun, right? Like who wants to do it? I always tell my patients, like, no one wants to see me ever. Like not one of my clients have ever looked forward to seeing me. That's how I know I'm doing a good job, right?
That's I've got one client that looks forward to seeing me.
Well, you're doing great, right? Like none of mine look forward to seeing me. And that's because we have to face our fear. And when we have to face discomfort, we usually need to be really clear on why, right? We need to be really clear on why am I doing this terrible, scary thing? Like for me, it's like you were talking about, you have a moment where it's like enough is enough. And you're like, I want my life back. I want to be able to get on a plane at any day and not be stressed out about food. And so ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, as you said, has a big component of mindfulness. It's really more of a way of understanding mindfulness in a clinical form, but also brings in this idea of how can you live a life according to your values, not fear. And I was living life fully according to fear. So ACT is huge in motivation, maintaining your treatment, feeling a sense of like alignment with where you're headed for the future. It's gold.
Yeah, and I love it from a grounding perspective as well. So when my mind's going a million miles an hour, I might be on a walk or whatever, and I love using this, sharing this technique is I'm on a walk, but I'm not really recognizing I'm on a walk or a run or whatever. And so if my brain's everywhere else but where my feet are, like brushing my hand along a bush as I walk past it and feeling the texture of the leaves, it's using your five senses to tune into where you are. Or it could be looking at the clouds or the trees swaying in the wind or the smells. Like we're in spring now, so the smells of all the flowers blooming, and it's a really great, easy way. And mindfulness sounds a bit wanky and sissy, and like a lot of guys go, "What are you talking about, Simon?" But it does work, and like it helps quieten the mind, bring you back to the present, and it's great for like if your kids are asking you questions and you find yourself in the car and you're just zoned out. Bring yourself back, like feeling the steering wheel, or it might be just tuning down the music and going, okay, and actually just mindfully pressing the volume down button or whatever, opening the window and just feeling the breeze on your face for 5 seconds and then closing up. I go, okay, Oh yeah. What did you want, son or daughter? You
Yeah,
know, why are you
exactly.
screaming at me for the last 10 minutes when I haven't tuned in? So
Right.
yeah, that's what I love about it as well. So
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it's sissy at all. I would love to like get into a debate with someone about that, because what's more beautiful and effective than actually being in this moment, right?
mm,
Like that is so it's and that's how anxiety can destroy us, right? It takes the moments away. I could tell you 3 hours of stories of where anxiety has taken someone away from the moment where they said their vows or the moment they delivered their baby, because all they were doing was like up in their head. We call it being
mm,
heady, right?
yeah.
Being really heady about things. What's cooler than actually getting to fully embrace this moment and be in the moment? It's a gift.
Yeah, and I also share this story. Like when I experienced burnout, I was looking for ways to improve my self care. So I joined a men's yoga group, and for a lot of guys growing up in Australia, like yoga, like men's yoga, like what is this? What are you talking about? This is totally against men's culture to go to a men's yoga thing. This is a
Especially in
hippie thing.
Australia.
Yeah. And so, but I went anyway, and because I'm like stiff like a plank, and I just found it was just other guys who are similar like me, a little bit older. I was probably the youngest guy by about 10 years, maybe. And but I'd walk into a session and my mind would be racing. It'd be like, what's happened in the morning? What have I got to do this afternoon? What's going on next week at work? But then I'd get to a moment like three-quarters of the way through where everything just drops away and the mind quietens, and I can step into that mindfulness spot where I'm just
Mhm.
focusing on the breath and the movement and just enjoying stretching, actually, just focusing on the stretch and feeling a bit more flexible. I'm not as flexible as I used to be growing up, and it was just a nice thing. And then I'd walk out of the session and everything would just be calm until I got home and the chaos started again with the kids. But it would just be calm for that moment, and it was just really nice self-care technique. So I love sharing it from a guy's perspective. You can do this stuff in either a yoga situation, Pilates. I did Pilates for a while,
Yeah,
or just walking and or going for a run, riding your bike, swimming, all these types of things, tuning into your senses and help quieten the mind, because it does work. And it's
yeah,
not, it's, as you said, it's not sissy, it's not wanky, it's not feminine to do. It's just
no,
a cool, easy thing that you can do,
yeah,
and nobody needs to know you're even doing it. Like you can do it,
right,
you know, just by yourself.
yeah,
And it doesn't have to be. I always say it doesn't have to be a room, because when we talk about mindfulness, a lot of people think meditation. So you don't have to
right,
sit in a dark room with a candle and listening to Himalayan music or anything like that, which is really cool to do in itself.
yeah,
But it doesn't have to look like that. It can be on the go.
yeah. You can do it
So
while you wash dishes. You can do it while you
yes,
put shoelaces on.
while you're eating and or having a coffee or whatever. And I tried gratitude journaling for a while, and I really struggled with that because I kept regurgitating the same gratitude, like I'm grateful for family, I'm grateful for work and having a home. But my psychologist actually shared with me a unique tip, which is to break your day down into hourly chunks, and in those write down the things you did, not the things that you're grateful for. And so I love my coffee. I'm sharing a coffee with you right now. So that become having a cup of coffee in the morning became something I was grateful for.
Yeah,
And then you could take that and become mindful of those moments in your day, like washing the dishes. It could be even just finishing mowing the lawn. I love going out and mowing the lawn, but then at the end, looking at the lawn and going, we've done it. It's not growing with weeds and flowers. And my grass looks like grass at the moment, which is another mindful thing. You just go, oh, wow, that's wonderful. I've achieved something as
yeah,
well. Which
yeah.
when we struggle with mental illness, we can feel like we're never achieving anything. We're always
That's
trying to
right.
chase a dream, but never achieving the dream. So, I'd love to talk about CBT School now, and where did this come from, and what does it do, and how can it help, and yeah, where did the idea come from to start this project for you?
Yeah. So it actually came from a moment of pretty severe frustration. So I was so lucky. I got excellent training in CBT and ERP, which is, 10 years ago when I started was really rare. Like very few people had this very specific training. And so when I went out on my own and got my own private practice, here I am like, look at me, I'm going to help all these people and I'm so excited and my mission is finally happening. And then you get all these calls for people who need help. And then I would have, because I was a one-man show at the time, I'd have to call them back. Oh, you're in a different state. Sorry, can't help you.
Mhm.
Oh, you can't afford therapy. Sorry, can't help you. Oh, you live too far away from me and you live in a city where there isn't any. Sorry, can't help you. And I was getting totally bummed out because I was like, here I am, like ready to help all these people. And I was getting lots of clients. I was absolutely full, but I was also just sending people away to
Mhm.
nothing at the time. Luckily now there's more resources and way more therapists, which is wonderful. But at that time in 2016, there was very little.
Mm.
One particular case was a family in Idaho, and there was zero OCD therapists, like zero in the whole state of
Wow.
Idaho. And so I thought, okay, I could sit down and record the first 6 sessions, which is a lot of psychoeducation. It's really me just showing, on video exactly what I would teach you if I was with you in session. And I was like, this will be my catch-all, right? For the people who don't have, I'm turning them away. No one, this is what I created. And I was so excited about it, right? Like I was just like, this is so exciting. But then not realizing that hundreds of people need this, right?
Mm.
Like I was just thinking I would forward it to the dozen people who contact me. But once I got onto social media and was like, oh my gosh, there are people all around the world who don't have access to this. So CBT School was created. It's an online website, and we have free courses and paid courses, and we have a free podcast that comes out every week. And it's just resources. It's not therapy, right? It's because I have therapists who work for me now, and we've
Mhm.
got a large team. But this is for people who either don't have access or can't afford access, or then it sort of was interesting that people who were in therapy, they wanted to hear what ERP sounded like from a different perspective. And
Mhm.
so, even people who are in therapy take the course and take away, like, even if it's key points or motivating points. And that's what's so wonderful about it. Now we have courses for panic disorder and generalized anxiety and hair pulling and skin picking. Very soon we'll have a social anxiety course as well.
Wow. Such a cool idea. And I find it interesting over in the US because over here, like once we qualify, we can essentially provide support nationwide. So the fact that you can only go state by state there must be a really challenging thing.
Yeah, the states here, every state is different. Now I live in California. It is the most regulated. So
Mm.
interestingly, during COVID, my husband and I and my family considered coming back to Australia because Australia handled COVID like like way better than we handled it. And I was like, I just got to go home. I want to be with my family. And because to get home was impossible at the
Mm.
time. Um, and yeah, no, so California has its own license. I can't even practice as a therapist in Australia because of how specific the license is here. So just my state, that's all I'm allowed.
I wished it was so much more freeing. Like you could, yeah, I've heard so many stories similar like that where you got to cross state lines or whatever just to get support. Even
Yeah.
in my practice is only a brand new practice. I've only been open for a month or so, and I've had conversation with people that can't afford it, and I'm like, well, as a business owner, I was like, I'm a therapist, but I'm also a business owner. I'm like, I can't keep giving away my time for free because I've also got
Yeah.
to pay a mortgage as well, which a lot of social workers, I'm a social worker, so a lot of social workers struggle in that space of being able to give people the support they need, but also being able to give the support to themselves and their
Yeah.
family as well. So
Right.
but it's such. I've been on the website. It's a great website, and also you give so much of yourself on your Instagram account as well. Your anxiety toolkit. So where was your drive to start that particular Instagram page, and it's just going phenomenally.
Thank you. Yeah. The truth was, as I said to you, is like, okay, I made the course. It's all ready to go. I'm going to hand it off to people as I need it, but
Mm.
I guess I've got to kind of have to market it, right? So I just started sharing tips and tools,
Mm.
right? Like I was like, I might as well give this a go. I'm not a marketer. What's so interesting is I have zero training in marketing and I actually really enjoy it. I really love the challenge of it, and it's been really quite a fun piece of it for me. Um, so to now I actually only work part-time as a therapist, and I work part-time sort of just really putting together these resources. The way I like to think of it is I have all these levels of treatment, right? So you can get one-on-one, or you can get the courses, or you can get free courses, or I wrote a book in 2020 as well. So my hope is that depending on whatever your resources are, there's something at your level that will be helpful.
Yeah, that's what I love about like just doing the podcast as well, like the Mindful Men podcast. It's a free resource where we can have conversations around the world about the same things that I think it creates a sense of community and connection, and all of a sudden you feel less alone in the world because like, oh, Kimberley went through this, and Simon went through this, or somebody else went through that, and I'm not the only person in the world that's experienced that, because we can often feel like that. I think particularly OCD, where I think the average is 15 to 17 years between first symptom and first treatment in a lot of the case. And you can go through that time. And I went through 20 years of staying in silence, which I didn't need to because I thought it was just me. But no, there's a whole world of people just like me out there that can help. And that's where I found like Instagram was great for the OCD community because they're so well knit, and they're so encouraging and sharing their stories and so forth. So hats off to you for what you've done and sharing your story, but also creating all these resources that people can tune into depending on their level of capabilities and finances as well. Really enjoyed this chat and exploring this with you. How can people get in touch with you? And we'll include the links in the show notes for people to touch base. But where's the main points that people can touch base with you if they want to work with you?
Sure. So you can, if you want to work with me or one of my clinicians one-on-one, that's actually a separate webpage, which is kimberleyquinlan-lmft.com. LMFT stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist, which is my license. If you're wanting online resources, you can go to cbtschool.com. That has all of our free courses and paid courses. Or if you want, you can listen to the podcast, which is called Your Anxiety Toolkit, or Instagram at Your Anxiety Toolkit as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll certainly put the links into the show notes so that people can tune in. A couple more questions and I'll let you go. What's some advice that you could give to someone who thinks they might be experiencing an anxiety condition, maybe similar to what you've experienced, or OCD or something like that, but they've never got help and they don't know really what to do first? Like, from your experience, what would you tell them to encourage them to go check out something or speak to someone? What's some advice you could give there?
Oh, so much. First of all, I would say, please don't beat yourself up, right? Having an anxiety disorder is nobody's fault. And so that's the first thing. And what I would say is, if you have any energy, because anxiety is very exhausting, if you have any energy left, start to look for resources in your area, either a CBT therapist. There are some really great workbooks depending on what you're struggling with, OCD, generalized anxiety, social anxiety. There often are some really great CBT workbooks that you can use, that you could go through, even just as like putting your toe in the water, right? And starting there. And then if you can, go and get some help. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the gold standard for anxiety disorders, all of them. And so if you could just do a simple Google search in your area, or ask your GP, like if they have any referrals, that would be my biggest, first steps to take. But the next steps is, I think this goes a little deeper, but recovering from any mental illness is like climbing a mountain, right? It's a big mountain to climb. And so I would, as I say to all my patients, like, if you're going to climb a mountain, you want to have the good shoes, right? Like, you don't want to have your old Crocs wearing, or whatever, your flip-flops or whatever. So anywhere you can create a lifestyle that really, encourages your recovery and allows you to put all your focus on recovery, right? And that would be my biggest, because the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. It's like learning a language. You do have to put in some work to really recover, but it's totally possible.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that we don't always get it right, and we're not always going to win, and we might drop out of therapy, or we might change medications, or see different doctors, or have bad periods. I always reflect on mental illness as being a bit of a roller coaster. So we can go up and feel great, but we can also feel like we're hurtling down to earth and about to smash into the ground. So, everything balances out in the end. And I guess each person's journey is unique to theirs as well. Like it's, just because one person might take a year of getting well, but another person might take a lifetime as well. And it doesn't matter. It's not a race. It's just each in our own time. But some great tips there. I really like those. But last question, and it doesn't have to be anything we've talked about today in terms of topic wise, but I'd like to leave our listeners with something that our guests can plug. So it's something that makes you feel good, whether it's a book you're reading or a movie you watched or a TV show, some music, or even like a self-care activity or anything you like. What's something that makes you feel good at the moment?
Oh, that's a good question. Can it be a quote?
Can be anything you want. Yep.
Okay. So this is sort of a self-plug, but it's just so in my bones. If I was someone who got tattoos, and I'm not against tattoos, but if I ever got a tattoo, I would get a tattoo of my own quote, which is pretty gross. I know, like it's pretty weird. But one thing I say to myself every single day, and I say to my clients every single day, and so many of my followers have said was really helpful, is a quote that is, "It's a beautiful day to do hard things." Mm-hmm. That quote has gotten me through some really, really hard things and has reminded me to embrace that everybody has hard days, that life is 50-50 for every human being. And today is a beautiful day to face those hard things. That quote in and of itself, I think, has been life-changing for me. And a lot of people have said it's life-changing for them as well. So that's what I would say. It's not a plug for me. I don't make any money by you using it or anything. It's just a quote that it just, no matter, I have 2 children, actually have a son who has COVID right now. Like, no matter what the circumstances, that seems to be something that just grounds me into like, yes, Kimberley, you can do this hard thing. Just take one step at a time. So, anything. I actually got that from Grey's Anatomy, so I guess I'll plug Grey's Anatomy. He always said it's a beautiful day to save lives, and at the time I was going through a really difficult time, and I was just like, my therapist kept saying you can do hard things, so it kind of got molded together. So I guess I'll plug, McDreamy from Grey's Anatomy.
Love it, I love it. And if you put it on a t-shirt, if you put it on a t-shirt, then you can make some money out of it as well.
Well, so. I actually did for a very long time. We had them on sweatshirts, t-shirts, and everything, but I just don't have time to manage that anymore, so we shut it down. But there were a lot of people walking around with "It's a beautiful day to do hard thing" t-shirts.
And I love affirmations because they are so powerful and reassuring as well. I've got a few in my little toolkit as well that I use, and very similar to the one that you've just described. So. But Kimberley, thanks so much for your time. I really have appreciated talking with you across the globe. Give you a little bit of a slice of Aussie for your afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I just said to my kids before I came down to my office, I was like, I'm going to have a chat with an Australian guy. I'm so excited. Like, they were like, "Go, Mom," because they're American, and they're like, "Go, Mom." I'm always up for a chat with anyone who's Australian.
We'll give them a big g'day. Thank you so much.
I will. Thank you for the work you're doing too. I feel like we have such a long way to go with men's mental health, more now than ever. And so thank you for this amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. I find a lot of inspiration just from sharing my story, and it's something that guys struggle with. So that's just why I do it. And then, if I can help one bloke out there, either through my Insta or my podcast or through my therapy, then I'll be a happy therapist. So, but thank you. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah. Very, very cool. I'm so grateful for you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. And go enjoy your evening with your family, and I'll keep in touch with you soon. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you like it and leave a comment, and then share it with your mates. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a moment of future episodes to come.